Chief O'Brien is a man in demand. Things are still all kinds of broken on the station, and people acting like dicks about it isn't helping. The last straw is Cisco snapping at him about the replicators, so off he goes to fix them, maybe just to have an excuse to crawl inside something for a bit of peace. That lightning probably isn't supposed to be there, but the coffee is fine, so as far as Starfleet health and safety is concerned, it's within acceptable levels. He trots off to fix something else while the camera shows us a gizmo within the replicator, and one that starts doing a bit of flashy while some ominous music plays. Have the Cardigans left us a few gifts? Maybe that's why the replicators are acting up in the first place. Cisco's not the only one to have problems with them. One of Quark's very few customers, the place being almost empty for reasons we don't go into, is dissatisfied with the food he's given. He tries force-feeding it to Quark until Odo stops him. That may solve the immediate problem, but if Quark's replicators aren't fixed soon, he's going to have trouble staying in business. Only, perhaps there's another solution. Before he left, Odo mentioned that the replicators on the command level are working now, and that gives Quark an idea. He tries to track down which ones and finds the information is restricted. Such restrictions are for people who can't bypass them, though, and Quark is no such person. Back in Ops, O'Brien is making sure the replicators are working. Cisco's less of an arse about it this time around and thanks him, noting that he looks a little off. O'Brien puts it down to the environmental controls, but during a conversation about his wife's school, uses a sentence with some nonsense in it, as though he was mistaking his words. He corrects it after and goes about his day, with Cisco dismissing it too. I suspect we've just found the reason for the episode's title. Dax is discussing the matter of being a woman again with Kira, something she's not done for 80 years. Bugger all of that, though, because Quark invites them in to celebrate the repair of his replicator. How odd, he was quite low on O'Brien's list. Still, I'm sure we won't discover that one of the previously repaired replicators on the command level is now mysteriously not working again. Dax accepts Quark's offer while Kira declines and goes to Ops. She finds O'Brien in a bad way, certainly from his sleep deprivation, but possibly also something more. The something more proves to be true as, during a conversation, he starts talking proper bollocks again, only this time can't stop. To Bashir we go. Everything looks fine on his scans and tests, but there's clearly something off. O'Brien tries to type a message on a tablet and meets with the same garbled result. As far as Bashir can tell, his headmeat is fine, he just can't communicate or understand us. Aphasia is the term for it. That's what Bashir's telling Cisco anyway, as he reports being unable to discover the cause. We'll go through what O'Brien's been doing for the last couple of days, but the answer to that is a lot of stuff all over the place. Cisco puts Dax in charge of engineering until O'Brien is cured, then is immediately forced to find someone else as Dax has started talking utter bollocks too. Well, this is a problem. You could argue that Dax developing the same symptoms is a mixed bag. She may be out of action now, but it's given Bashir a new direction to explore as it suggests something contagious. And he's found it, too, a virus that sits in your headmeat and buggers up the connection between input, processing and output. Everything's still there, it's just wired up wrong. Finding out it's a virus is a good thing, of course, but that comes with its own problem. If this thing's contagious, that means we have to lock down the station. The quarantine doesn't apply to Quarks. That's what Quark is trying to convince Odo of anyway, arguing that he's an essential service. Besides, he's one of the few places outside of the command deck that has a working replicator, something Quark says was fixed by his brother, Rom. Odo doesn't sound convinced by the explanation, but lets it go. Tangentially, Quark refers to Rom as his assistant here rather than his brother. For any other species, that might be considered a script error, but for Ferengi, it's arguably the correct order of importance. Not everybody is taking advantage of Quark's services. The captain that was giving O'Brien shit at the start of the episode wants to be gone, and his spoiling cargo is only part of the reason. If this goes on for much longer, we might have to start keeping ships here by force. Quark's pushing a trolley down a corridor, and from the way he looks around, it's somewhere he shouldn't be. We're in an unused room, and it's one with a working replicator, so it looks like he's been jogging up here to fill his food orders rather than stripping it for parts. That's probably the better option from a legal point of view, but Odo, who was disguising himself as the trolley, disagrees when he changes back. Breaking into a room, even an unused one, is a crime, and one that has unintended consequences. Back in Ops, Bashir is explaining that the virus is likely being ingested. Kira doesn't understand how, what with our food being replicated and those replicators having filters. They're cardigan ones as well, so we can't even blame the Starfleet tendency for shit to break down every few days. Bashir's right though, he's tracked all the replicators on their level and they're all creating the virus. It's affecting people differently, which explains the time difference in some people, but they're all fucked. And it's not just the command staff, thanks to Quark. The instances of aphasia in visitors and family members are largely due to him and his unauthorized visits to a working replicator. Largely, but not completely. Bashir performs a test on the air and confirms his fears. The virus has mutated and become airborne. Over half the people on the station are infected now. On the plus side, some investigating by Kira has managed to find the flashy gizmo we saw earlier when O'Brien was repairing a replicator. She thinks it's Cardigan, a gift left for us when they decided to scarp her, and that would be in keeping with how they treated the place. Frankly, I'm a little surprised they didn't just drop the whole station on Bajor, but then I suppose we wouldn't have a TV show if they did that. Here's a twist, though. Kira's wrong. According to Bashir's investigation of the virus, it doesn't carry any of the techniques used by Cardigans, but it does suggest another species, the Bajorans themselves. A little more examination of the gizmo seems to back that up, the unit having been planted some 18 years back when the station was first built. Kira's guess is that whoever planted it got captured or killed before they could set it off, which is why it sat there for nearly 2 decades. But we have a lead now at least, and if we can track down who built it, they might have a solution. 18 years is a long time though, and it never having been triggered might mean there's nobody left from the original plot. Kira tries one of her contacts and gets a name for who might have had the knowledge to make it. It's a cold lead, the last firm location being 9 years ago, but it's something. We'd best be quick about it. O'Brien's taken a turn for the worse and has upgraded from nonsense to fevers. As far as Bashir can tell, people are going to start doing a dead in about 12 hours. Kira's chasing down the name she was given, a genetics expert who was thrown in prison by the Cardigans. If it's him, then getting locked up would certainly explain why the gizmo was never used. Slight problem though, records show he carked it during an escape attempt. Whether that was a real one or just what they put on the death certificate after the beating is another matter. But that death certificate itself might be useful as it was signed by a Bajoran medical assistant, one who was also a prisoner due to being a member of the same underground group as the dead guy. Maybe they shared a few stories while they were locked up, or possibly even worked together. He might be the only chance we've got, not because Bashir's out of ideas, but because he's out of words. He's infected too. The good news is Kira's found the guy who signed the death certificate. The bad news is he hangs up as soon as Kira mentions an aphasia virus being planted here. Well, I say bad news, but it does have a silver lining. Somebody who didn't know what she was talking about wouldn't have been quite so jumpy, so she thinks popping over to the planet to pick him up would be a good idea. I mean, okay, if he's innocent, then doing so would deliberately infect the guy, but, fuck him. Most of the crew are out of action now, and that means Sisko's running everything with Odo now Kira's gone for a little trip. It'd be a terrible time for a captain of a visiting ship to decide that he's leaving no matter what, so obviously that's what happens. He won't be reasoned with, so Sisko decides to just let him undock, then grab him with a tractor beam. It's a good plan, and it would probably have worked if the guy wasn't already trying to force his way out. Pulling on the dock means the clamps can't release, and we're told, rather than shown, that there have been some unfortunate malfunctions on his ship as a result. To Kira in a mega-shuttle as she approaches Bajor. A quick call to make sure the guy she spoke to is still in his office confirms that she'll be grabbing the right person when she teleports him aboard, much to his distress. While she's kidnapping someone, Sisko and Odo are trying to contact the captain that fucked up his ship. He doesn't answer, which is understandable, what with all that fire. Bollocks to him though, as we've got bigger problems. The ship will kaboom in about 15 minutes, and that's clearly not a good thing while it's still connected to the station. Odo thinks we can push it away by kabooming the clamps that were holding it in place, and Sisko agrees, but can't go himself as he's looking a bit peaky. The inevitable gibberish follows, which means Odo's all we've got left. Well, not quite all we've got left. Kira's on her way back, using the time to explain to her kidnap victim that if he can't cure this virus, he's going to become a victim of it. And Quark's still up and about too, responding to a call for help from anyone on the station by Odo, and making it clear that his assistance will be followed by a bill. He teleports Odo to the docking area, though not before cracking a joke about having never done this before. Well, probably a joke. It's a success anyway, and Odo finds himself surrounded by smoke. As he looks around, Kira's coming into land. We nip down to the infirmary, where our kidnap victim looks through Bashir's progress and makes positive noises, which is probably just as well, as we've only got a couple of minutes left of the episode. Oh, and Kira's talking shite now, so that's her out of it. Odo's found the docking bay where our detonating ship is parked, and handily the captain is lying at the airlock ready to be rescued. I think having him die as a result of his own fuckery would have been a valid moral to the story, but this way gives Odo a chance for some heroism. With the captain rescued, Odo does some lever pulling while Quark screams in his ear about time. The ship is farted away from Deep Space Nine, and at a distance that I'd argue is a bit more than it should have covered in the 10 seconds we were told it had left, it kabooms. At least the captain doesn't have to worry about his perishable cargo anymore. Our kidnap victim was able to create a cure, and we're dosing everybody up. We'll assume he's chosen not to make his kidnapping an official matter, what with that whole being implicated in biological warfare thing and all. Everything's getting back to normal, and normal means that O'Brien doesn't get any time off, even though he nearly carked it. Cisco replicates a cup of coffee, only to discover that it's shit again and start shouting, so we'll leave O'Brien to be abused and underappreciated some more until the next adventure. Before we start the analysis, there's a bit of a fucko boingo I'd like to point out, and one that probably wasn't spotted during the original airing because of standard definition television broadcasts. As the guy we kidnapped is looking through Bashir's research, we see these lines here. Contacted Chief O'Brien, requested environmental engineering data for last 24 hours. I hope to correlate this data with the locations of the living quarters or workstations of the affected individuals. As ideas go, it's both reasonable and logical, but it's also completely impossible. O'Brien was the first person affected by the virus before Bashir started his research. By the time Bashir was looking into infection vectors, O'Brien was already less coherent than a caffeinated toddler. We'll assume whoever was in charge of mocking up the displays simply wasn't given enough data about who was healthy at this point in the plot. To the story itself, and it probably qualifies as Deep Space Nine's first standard Star Trek affair. No real exploration of characters, nothing new of note for future reference. It was bound to happen at some point, but it's still a little disappointing to see it so soon. Over the course of our time with Voyager, I noticed a pattern. You could pretty reliably gauge the quality of a story by the quantity of science bollocks it uses. There are exceptions to this rule, but it generally holds up quite well. It's telling, then, quite how much technical wank has been thrown at this one. Some of that is a necessity as we're talking about medicine, but I'd have happily traded a scene or two of Bashir talking about viruses for, say, one of him showing concern about Dax. It wouldn't have affected the plot significantly, and we'd have got somebody other than Cisco showing compassion. A whole station infected and only one person visibly giving a shit about anybody else was, in my opinion, a missed opportunity. We don't like to be entirely negative here though, so I'll give praise to whoever decided to make the device Bajoran rather than Cardigan. The implications of that, namely that it shows Bajoran underground fighters would have been willing to kill all the traders, ship crew and Bajoran workers here in order to stick one to their oppressors, helps to paint a picture of just how murky resisting occupation can be. The story also highlights the harsh reality that a conflict being over doesn't mean an end to people getting hurt. The 90s saw significant publicity about the long-term effects of landmine use in conflicts, and I wonder if that was an influence on the story here. Real-world concerns being the foundation for a plot is certainly something we see on Trek regularly enough for it to be a possibility. Overall, Babel is probably our first genuinely forgettable episode of Deep Space Nine. It's not particularly bad or in any way offensive, but it doesn't give the characters any interesting growth, or do anything that'll stick in your mind after the credits have rolled. End of episode.
We can't keep this up forever. Sooner or later they're going to get some working guns, or realize they could shoot us down with a ship.
Yeah, well, we're not getting shot at right now, and that'll do for me. Gives us time to figure something out. That's a thought. How long would it take to learn how to land a shuttle?
Proper landing, or Tom Paris landing.
Proper landing.
A few days maybe, but that's for pilots with fingers. It'll take longer for us.
Okay, alright, I could give that a go. What's the worst that could happen?
You click the station and the shuttle disappears, causing us to asphyxiate in space.
That was rhetorical.
Or we impact the docking bay at speed, our momentum retained as the shuttle vanishes, and we are thrown into a wall or floor, where we die slowly in a pool of juices.
Yep, thanks, computer.
Or we've misjudged this completely, and we are deleted from the timeline too. Let's be honest, the amount of time fuckery that Janeway did means there's no guarantee what's going to happen when we touch the station.
Is this because of that banner I hung up back on Voyager?
A little bit, yes. Woof.